right?
Music for the cinema is clearly quite different than any kind of music that we have preceding it. Concert music or music for the theater. What the cinema seemed to demand from the very beginning was a music that was stylistically diverse. That is, if scene one was in the Egyptian pyramids, and then scene two was at the scientist's home in London, clearly you couldn't be running on with the same kind of Strauss-like or even Wagner-like music and expect to be able to enrich the scene in a really graphic and descriptive way. So the styles had to shift, and sometimes quite abruptly.
Harry Warren, who wrote a lot of the songs in the Warner Brothers musicals, had a trick he used to do that we all adored. He'd start out with Pagliacci, and then change to T for Two by Vincent Youmans, and that was Harry.
Silent film composers concentrated especially on music that came out of 19th century melodrama, and there's standard types like Misterioso, or the Maestoso for grand scenes, or the Agitato. All sorts of categories, and formal types, punctuation music, exit music, entrance music. The villain was about to appear, we get this. The villain would appear, we all know what's going to happen next. And the point was to emphasize the fact that the villain was here. Now, a skillful composer, arranger, let's call him, would produce a compilation score, which might include a few original bits plus things drawn from the library. Anything from Beethoven to Verdi to the old Oaken Bucket. So that silent film practice plus theater practice represented an enormously broad range, and the film composer, sound film composer, could draw on every single one of those things, plus, of course, live performances. The medium itself, records that were synchronized to the projector, is a new medium.
Hey man, say man, I've been looking for you. What's the idea of passing me by? Didn't you hear me cry? Could you, would you do some work for me too?
Musicals, of course, were very popular starting from 1929. In fact, the great bulk of movies done in 1929 were musicals, which is why the Hollywood producers essentially cleaned out Broadway. When Max Steiner went to Hollywood in 1929, he went as an arranger, orchestrator for musicals. So in other words, he was doing in Hollywood precisely what he had been doing in New York, where he worked with people like Victor Herbert, Gershwin, Kern, doing mainly orchestrating, but sometimes also conducting. Over the period 1927-1935, roughly, film scoring changed, I think, in two basic ways. First, the composer was no longer, as it were, obligated to write a complete score that occupied every minute of the film. Because of re-recording, he was able to pick out the places that he wanted to spot with music. And he knew that the technicians could re-record anything. The other point that is essential for later film scoring is that if a composer chose, he could synchronize the music to action in a way and with a consistency that simply was not possible, certainly with orchestral performances. Re-recording with the opportunity to make timings for scenes, mark off a point and record to those timings.
Is there anything else you'd like to try?
Do a recording, do a dub, check to see whether you'd made the sync, whether you'd actually caught what you wanted to catch, redo it if you didn't. All those possibilities were there, and composers took advantage of them.
Each one
had his own system. It was really, at the beginning, well, you know, after a while you get so you know, but at the beginning it fascinated me how each one did things a little differently than the other. Max was the click track, but only he wore the clicks. We didn't wear them. Later on we did, but at the beginning he wore them to keep himself where he wanted to be with the film. And also to match a door slamming, you know, whatever he wanted to catch. It was all clicked out for him. Click, 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 click. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's what you conduct to.
If you go back to the silent film days, there was absolutely no necessity for film music departments as such. The films went out, and sometimes there was music that went with it, but more often the theater director just picked out, you know, stuff following some kind of a suggestion sheet or whatever. But now comes sound film, and now you had to have music departments. You had to have an orchestra on staff, paid a salary. You had the composers, the orchestrators, the arrangers, copyists who would extract the parts from the scores. At the head of this whole setup is the music director. Then you had a competent staff of music editors. Music editors were never needed.
The general responsibility of the music editor is to work with the composer, because he knows nothing about film. All he knows how to do is to write music, to write the sequences as he sees them, but what does he do with it? There's a lot of film work involved in this. The first thing is we have a small projection room where the director, the film editor, the composer, and the music editor will sit in, and we're going to spot the picture. Spotting means to decide where each cue is going to start and where it's going to end. This room is equipped in such a way that you can operate the projector yourself. You can start it and stop it and go backwards and so on and so forth. And we might run the picture and somebody would say, why don't we start at this particular scene cut? And I have to take all these notes that everybody says. Now the composer may just decide this may be an overall cue, and he's just going to start at the beginning and going to go at the end. But in order for him to get the mood, he has to read all this material. If he decides that he wants to catch a certain action at a certain spot, then I have to mark that and put a streamer on to end on that particular frame. And punch a hole in it. So when he's conducting, he'll be waiting for that, and suddenly he sees it, and he'll go like that, see? So it all depends on his ability to catch that streamer, and he's usually pretty good at it.